Hi, I'm Stephanie Hutchins, author of Transformation After Trauma, Embracing Post-Traumatic Growth. Now, why I'm coming on today is to discuss a question that I am often asked after live webinars and workshops. I encourage people to stick around afterward to be able to ask me any additional questions they have. And what I've been noticing is a trend in a question that commonly comes up. And in the version, and it's always around this topic of forgiveness. And so, the common rendition of the question is, do I need to forgive my perpetrator in order to heal? To be able to move on after my trauma. This is what I'm commonly asked. And how I always respond to this question is that I believe that the most important person to forgive is yourself, okay? And all of the ways that you've tried to survive in the aftermath of your trauma. And people often, they take a step back and it stuns them in many ways because most people don't consider that. They don't consider the fact that they carry an immense amount of shame for all that they've done to be able to cope after their trauma. And so I always encourage them to evaluate what they've done to survive after their trauma. And first, before I continue, I guess I should say that what trauma leaves us with is an inability to cope. Okay. See, trauma overwhelms our capacity to cope, and it also leaves us with this feeling that we've lost control. And so, in order to gain control back, even just for a moment after our trauma, or just get a moment's relief from our pain, we hang on to just anything that comes along our path that gives us even a moment's relief or, again, some semblance of control. So we may hang on to overeating. We may engage in casual sex. We may drink alcohol or do drugs or cut ourselves or just do a number of different things that in many ways would be considered harmful. And it's so easy for outsiders, people that have never experienced truly immense pain. It's so easy for them to stand from the outside, looking, at, people that are going through this with condemnation and, or a mixture of condemnation and pity, and judgment. And in many ways, we also, us as trauma survivors, also look at ourselves that way. We pass similarly harsh judgment upon ourselves for all the ways that we're just trying to survive after our trauma. And I know that myself, for years I carried an immense amount of shame and honestly disgust over the things that I did, like the promiscuity, the severe eating disorder, the drinking, and, just all the ways that I harmed my body, and for years I didn't understand it, but now that, many years have passed since my traumas and I've had more time to heal, I'm able to look at my, what I've done and to cope differently. Okay. Now, so I'm a life coach and I use a number of techniques when working with my clients. And one of them is NLP. It stands for Neuro Linguistic Programming. And one of the basic assumptions behind NLP is that we're all working perfectly. And what we mean by that is that every habit or behavior we have, we've acquired and maintained because it served us at some point in time in our life. Yes, there can come a point when the negatives, start to outweigh the benefits over time. But everything we've done in the aftermath of our trauma, we did to survive, if even just for a moment. You know, I was suicidal for many years of my life. You know, the pain was so severe and I was just so hopeless that I just didn't want to exist any longer. And so when I was able to start looking at, you know, the overeating, the promiscuity, and all the ways that I harmed my body, and I was able to look at it, that each of them allowed me to at least cope for a little bit longer. It allowed me to survive a little bit longer. And the longer that I persisted on earth and the further I got as far as time away from my traumas, the more I healed. And so I now look at all the things I did to survive is that they helped me. They truly helped me to survive. Okay. So I don't look any longer at all that I did to survive with disgust and shame. I look at it with pride and admiration and compassion and gratitude for all that it did to allow me to persist and experience life the way I am today. Okay. See, another NLP or an NLP technique I'm very fond of is reframing. And reframing is simply about changing your perspective. Okay. And so I encourage you to do the same. Okay. And so I encourage you to take inventory of all that you've done in an effort to survive in the aftermath of your trauma. Okay. Really sit back and think about it, and think about not only what you've done to cope, and I encourage you to journal about it and write it down, but you know, if not, you can sit back and think about it. And I'd like you to think about the benefit that you gained from each, okay, of those coping mechanisms. So if it was overeating, what did you gain from that? If it was drinking alcohol, what did you gain from that? Okay, and you gained something. Okay, it could have been a distraction. It could have been, just a change in feeling in your body. See, the other thing about me is I spent 12 years of my life as a college professor teaching a variety of biology courses, but most of the biology courses I taught were about the human body. I taught about the human body and brain, and what you have to realize is overeating, drinking alcohol, doing drugs, engaging in sex, all of these things, what they do is they release a whole host of feel-good chemicals in our brain. Okay, so there's a reason they work. All right. But what I need you to understand is that there are other ways that we can release this whole host of feel-good chemicals without causing harm to our body. Okay. So once you take inventory of what you've done to cope in the aftermath of your trauma, and you've taken inventory of the benefits you've gained, okay, from those coping mechanisms, I encourage you to start finding ways, if you haven't already, to replace those coping mechanisms, okay, that may no longer be serving you. See, we can't just stop a bad habit. Okay, this is, it's a myth. We don't just stop drinking. We don't just stop, doing drugs. We don't just stop. That's just not how things work. We have to replace it with something else. Okay. And so I think it's promising for you to know that things like exercise, laughing, okay, hugging, things like this, there's all sorts of things that can release the same host of feel-good chemicals that eating, drinking, using drugs, and having sex will. Okay. And so once you realize your coping mechanisms that you may no longer want to hold on to, you can start seeking out alternate coping mechanisms to be able to use instead. Okay. And during that process of replacing your habits, you're going to have slip ups. Okay, there's going to be times you're going to revert backward and use an old coping mechanism, and try your best not to be hard on yourself. You're reverting back because your body and mind knows it works. Okay, so look at yourself with compassion and try your hardest to not beat yourself up by slipping back into old patterns, and just treat the next day as a new day and a new beginning. Okay, and once you, and I promise you, once you begin to look at all that you've done in an effort to survive with love and compassion and gratitude, okay, for keeping you alive, it will release this deep-seated shame you may be carrying, okay, in the aftermath of your trauma. And once you're able to start letting go of some of that shame and disgust and judgment for yourself, and you begin forgiving yourself, that's when I believe that you're going to be able to experience the greatest amount of growth and healing after your trauma. Okay, so if you have any questions, please reach out. Thanks so much for listening.